Bang bang, Caliban, Caliban. Bang bang, Caliban.
Hark! For in the commerce twixt old text and new, engaged and interpreted across the veil of time, is a dialogue that doth meaning reform. Canonical worlds reawakened, their stillness stirred to speech. Master Shakespeare's The Tempest, born of Renaissance flame, bears the tenets of humanist ideal, conduct as belief and ken craft the self. Yet Mistress Atwood, wise in postmodern eye, doth reframe this tale through lenses socio-political and contemporary, interrogating these quests of identity and performance so. She amplifieth the bard's themes of performance and marginalization, exposing the twin edge of imposed selfhood, how it doth liberate and bind. Where The Tempest posits the self as an actor of mask, Hagseed doth echo louder, how language and station influence the self as seen. A most notable twinning of the interpretive parley between Shakespeare and Atwood lies in the understanding of identity as a thing performed, where roles do either unlock or shackle. In The Tempest, the world is but theatrical. Prospero doth play God, seizing upon the island as divine playwright of men. Such does Renaissance humanist thought pertain to troublings of paideia and virtue, as present in the bard's own portrayal of Prospero, that in the pursuit of knowledge, thus freedom, lies also the peril of moral turpitude. Prospero's speech: "Our revels now are ended. These are actors, we're all spirits, and are melted into air, into thin air," betrays the illusion of reality, rendering identity likened to passing phantasm, accounted in life and play alike. Through metaphor, self-aware tongue, and imagery so ephemeral, the bard doth wrought clear. The self is no stone, but smoke, defined by who doth look and when, a motive of which begs reality's permanence. So too are Ariel and Caliban made creatures of servant and savage alike, bound by Prospero's naming. Unveiled is the effect of power upon the perceived self. Shakespeare's ascendanton and parallelism do lend Ariel's plea of freedom the abrupt cadence of captivity. I have done thee worthy service, told thee no lies, made thee no mistakings, emphasizing how servitude be a role one learns to speak. Herein lies the analogous of Atwood's world through symbolic and structural both, the concern of postmodern with art and authorship, the nature of which performance be no metaphor alone. For Hagseed unfolds within prison, as Felix doth unfold within himself, a man shifting of grief on context. Father, madman, and director, doth show how the self is surrendered and refracted upon the other's eyes, yet formed anew from within. Mistress Atwood extends the theatrical motive of Shakespeare's into the modern setting of a correctional centre most foul, where the self diffuses, transformed by act. These prisoners too do put on roles, not as disguise, but second skin, that they pretend to be someone else, and for once in their lives they love themselves, their personas kept singly by belief of others, wrought with such emphatic force to speak to postmodern creed, that identity is a play limitlessly performed and given meaning only by the gaze that accepts it. In understanding the bard's use of impersonation as mechanism for self-realization, Atwood's depiction of impersonation as tool for the suppression of individuality be granted interpretive nuances, shedding light on the unstable nature of a self-imposed. Prospero, master of the island, aside each their place, his control a fortress built of illusion, as Felix, in sorrow and vengeance, manipulate his cast that he might art a catharsis of his own making. Yet where Shakespeare doth view this control as a moral ambiguity, in reflection of social tensions oft within the Jacobean, Atwood's modern critique pierces it, enhancing audience understanding that redemption lie not in domination, but in the reclamation of one's story entire. Perception, as a central aspect of identity, constructs how others' views define the self. In The Tempest, Shakespeare shapes Caliban's identity through colonial rhetoric, where he condescendingly describes Caliban as a born devil on whose nurture can never stick, denying him the possibility of linguistic or moral development according to European ideals. This reinforces the cultural relativism introduced to Jacobean England with their 1603 translation of Montaigne's Of the Cannibals, which challenged dominant assumptions of European superiority by suggesting so-called savage societies were morally equal, if not superior. Prospero's reference to the concept of nature versus nurture, using dehumanizing language, reflects the colonial impulse to degrade the other to justify subjugation. Significantly, Caliban laments, "You taught me language, and my profit on't it is, I know how to curse. foregrounding how education, especially when imposed, can become an instrument of control rather than empowerment. The bitter irony in Caliban's words reveal how language, intended as a civilizing tool, strips him of agency, alienating him from his own voice and cultural identity, demonstrating that when knowledge is not shared on equal terms, it reinforces existing power structures rather than dismantling them. Atwood critiques this cultural imposition by reinterpreting the reclamation of language for the marginalized for the contemporary audience, where understandings of modern incarceration systems enable views of language as a tool for resistance and self-construction. The players learn not to mimic, but to mould, to interpret lest obey. Where Caliban was denied his say, Atwood's men are authors of their own expression. She inverts the old colonial enchantments of the Tempest and proclaims the long-silenced may yet wield subjective song. Indeed, Atwood extendeth the bard's play by fashioning scenes anew from the pens of prisoners, a metaplay wherein the tale is written from perceived truths, reinforcing a notion forgotten. Man exists in the ability to author oneself. Thus, whist of Shakespeare's impost of word and mien upon poor Caliban, as form of domination, doth expedite audience ken of Atwood's symbolic return of language to the beaten as act of reclamation, politic and personal. The contrast here implied be echoed in the desire to be wise hereafter and seek for grace, for even Caliban, once scorned, is afforded the beginnings of biblically alluded redemption through the very speech wielded to suppress, where imperative tone do signal turn of moral reckoning, and alliteration of soft s reflect solemn sincerity. Yet the theme of learning doth unfold as double-faced, ostensibly empowerment, privy erasure. In The Tempest, Shakespeare doth portray Prospero as the Renaissance magus, with metaphoric high charms and art. Manipulates he the world of natural and human, sharing true wisdom, not with daughter nor servant, enlightening Paideia in paternalistic views, power when withheld. The conflation of Ken with hierarchy doth influence depictions of Fletcher Correctional, which becometh a new Alexandria, subverting pedagogy of Shakespeare's tradition to wield scripts of the bards as instruments, for this be not tower of ivory, but of climb and struggle. They'll be hauled up the stairs of literacy step by step. She writes her metaphor and repetition, a signal of education not as polish, but release. Thus, Atwood upends Jacobean ideologies of knowledge for control, positing that education is a right belonging to all. By framing education as a contested space between coercion and liberation, an understanding of the conversation between the Tempest and Hagseed provokes viewers to question and interpret whom education is designed to serve. Such, the values appreciated from one's education and cultural environment shape internal self-perception, while the language available dictates how that self is understood and expressed externally. In sum, Hagseed doth evolve the Tempest in homage, where Shakespeare's folk were trapped by how the world beheld them. Atwoods do rise against their frames. She revealeth how the prisons of today, though changed in form, do restrict the soul, but how through art, through mask, through story, these bonds may break. She taketh the bard's magic and transmuteth it, as the transformative potency of speech for spell and word for wand. Where Shakespeare hinteth at the performative nature of self, Atwood declareth. Where he exploreth the loss of voice, she unveileth restoration. The greater discourse betwixt these texts lies in redefinition, metamorphosis of the vice regained, of the self reborn. For through close reckoning with Shakespeare's own craft, the shaping of identity with language, with illusion, with role, Atwood doth render Hagseed as purest an act of literary reclamation.
Bang bang, Caliban, 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 Bang bang, Caliban.